The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting golden streaks across the busy street. People rushed past, caught up in their own worlds, checking their phones, carrying shopping bags, or hurrying to catch a bus. In the midst of all this movement, an elderly man stood at the edge of the sidewalk, gripping his cane tightly. His frail hands trembled slightly, and his eyes darted back and forth, watching the steady stream of cars zoom by. He needed to cross, but the traffic was relentless, and each passing second seemed to add to his hesitation. Most people barely noticed him. A few glanced his way, but no one stopped. Maybe they were too busy, or maybe they just assumed someone else would help. But then, a woman walking by suddenly slowed down. Her name was Sarah. She wasn't in a hurry, just coming back from work, enjoying the cool breeze after a long day. As she approached the intersection, she noticed the old man's uncertain stance, his fingers tightening around the handle of his cane. Something inside her told her to stop. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently, stepping closer. "Would you like some help crossing the street?" The man looked up, his tired eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of relief in them, as if he had been silently hoping someone would ask. "Oh, that would be wonderful, dear," he said, his voice warm but weak. Sarah smiled and linked her arm with his, steadying him as they stepped off the curb. She kept pace with him, walking slowly, making sure he felt supported. The cars at the intersection waited, their engines humming impatiently. But she didn't care. This was more important. As they reached the other side safely, the man sighed. In gratitude, "Thank you, young lady," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "People don't always stop to help these days." Sarah waved it off with a smile. "It's no problem at all. I'm just glad I could help." The man gave her a thoughtful look, as if trying to memorize her face. "You have a kind heart," he said, "and kind hearts are rewarded in ways they don't expect." Sarah chuckled at the words, not thinking much of them. To her, it was just a simple act of kindness, something anyone should do. She said goodbye, gave him one last smile, and continued on her way, disappearing into the crowd. But what Sarah didn't know was that this small moment, this single act of compassion, was about to change her life in a way she never could have imagined. Because a few days later, she received something unexpected, something that would leave her speechless. And it all started with that one decision to stop and help. A few days had passed since Sarah helped the elderly man cross the street, and she had nearly forgotten about the encounter. Life went on as usual. Work, errands, the small routines that filled her days. But then, something unexpected happened. It started with a letter. One evening after a long day at work, Sarah came home to find an envelope slipped under her apartment door. There was no sender's name, just her own written in neat handwriting. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up, curiosity stirring inside her. Who would leave her a letter like this? She sat down on the couch, tore it open carefully, and unfolded the paper inside. "Dear Sarah, you may not remember me, but a few days ago, you stopped to help an old man cross the street. That man was me. I want you to know that your kindness did not go unnoticed. In a world that often feels rushed and indifferent, you reminded me that there are still good people, people who care. I had been feeling invisible, lost in the background, but your simple act of compassion brought me warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. I have something for you, a gift. You may not understand why yet, but I ask that you trust me. Go to the cafe on 5th Avenue tomorrow at noon, and everything will become clear. With gratitude, Henry." Sarah read the letter twice, her heart pounding. Who was this man really? And why was he inviting her to meet him? A part of her felt hesitant. Was this some kind of trick? But another part of her, the same instinct that had told her to stop and help him that day, urged her to go. The next morning, curiosity won over doubt, and at exactly noon, Sarah arrived at the cafe. It was a cozy little place, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and baked goods. She scanned the room until she spotted Henry, sitting near the window, dressed in a neatly pressed coat. When he saw her, his face lit up with a warm smile. "Ah, you came," he said, motioning for her to sit. Sarah slid into the chair across from him. "I got your letter. I wasn't sure if I should come, but I figured. Why not?" Henry chuckled. "I appreciate that. I know this must be strange for you." She nodded. "A little. But I have to ask, why did you send me that letter?" Henry's expression softened, and for a moment he was quiet, as if choosing his words carefully. Then he spoke. "There's something I want to give you, but first, I need to tell you a story." Sarah leaned in slightly, drawn in by the seriousness in his voice. "I wasn't always an old man struggling to cross the street," he began. "Once, I was someone very different. I had a family, a wife, a daughter." His voice wavered slightly, but he continued. "I spent years working, building a life, always thinking there would be more time. But life doesn't wait for anyone." Sarah listened intently, sensing the weight behind his words. "My wife passed away first," Henry said. "Cancer. It took her so quickly, I barely had time to say goodbye. After that, it was just me and my daughter, Emily." He paused, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "She was my whole world." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She could see the pain in his eyes, the kind of pain that never truly fades. But then, "I lost her too," he said quietly. "A car accident. One moment she was there, the next, gone." Sarah inhaled sharply. "I'm so sorry." Henry nodded, his gaze distant. "That kind of loss, it changes a person." I withdrew from life, stopped caring about things that once mattered. I let the years pass, going through the motions, but never really living. He looked at her then, his eyes steady. "Until that day on the street, when you stopped to help me." Sarah frowned slightly. "But that was just a simple act of kindness, I know." He interrupted gently. "But to me, it was more than that. You reminded me of my daughter, Sarah. She was like you, kind, thoughtful, always willing to help someone in need. That day, for the first time in a long time, I felt something again, a spark of hope." Sarah's chest tightened. She hadn't expected this, hadn't realized how much that small moment had meant to him. Henry reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small envelope, placing it on the table between them. "And that's why I want to give you this." Sarah hesitated before picking it up. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it and pulled out a single piece of paper. As her eyes scanned the words, she felt her breath catch in her throat. It was a check, a large sum of money, more than she had ever seen in her life. Her head snapped up. "Henry, He held up a hand, stopping her protest. "Before you say anything, listen to me. This is not charity. This is a gift, a thank you." His voice was firm but kind. "I have more money than I need, but what I don't have is time, and I don't want to leave this world without knowing I've done something meaningful." Sarah's mind spun. "But this is too much. I can't accept this." Henry smiled. "You can, and you will, because I believe in paying kindness forward, and I know you'll do something good with it." Sarah sat there, speechless, the check burning in her hands. She had never expected this, never imagined that a single moment of kindness could lead to something so life-changing. But before she could say another word, Henry's face turned slightly pale. His hand clutched his chest, and his breathing became uneven. Sarah's heart pounded. "Henry, are you okay?" And then, right there in the middle of the cafe, Henry slumped forward. Sarah's chair scraped against the floor as she jumped up, panic setting in. "Someone call an ambulance!" she shouted. The cafe erupted into motion, but all Sarah could focus on was Henry, this man who had just changed her life, now suddenly fragile and slipping away before her eyes. And in that moment she realized this wasn't just a gift. It was something much, much more. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for Henry, her heart pounding in her chest. His breathing was shallow, his face pale. The cafe buzzed with panic. Someone had already called an ambulance, and a barista rushed over with a glass of water, though it was clear Henry needed far more than that. "Henry, stay with me," Sarah urged, gripping his hand tightly. His eyes fluttered open, and he gave her a weak smile. "Looks like my timing is terrible," he murmured. "Don't say that," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Help is coming. Just hold on." The minutes stretched endlessly, but soon, the sound of sirens filled the air. Paramedics rushed in, lifting Henry onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him out, he turned his head toward Sarah, his grip still faintly holding hers. "Keep the gift, Sarah," he said softly. "Make it matter." And then, before she could respond, they carried him away. Sarah stood frozen, the check still clutched in her hand, her mind racing. What had just happened? Only moments ago, they had been sitting together, talking like old friends. Now, Henry was fighting for his life, and she had no idea if she would ever see him again. She couldn't just stand there. Without a second thought, she grabbed her bag and ran out the door, chasing after the ambulance. Hours passed at the hospital, each second stretching painfully. She sat in the waiting room, unable to leave, unable to think about anything else. Henry had no family, no one else who would be waiting for news. She had to be there. Finally, a doctor emerged, his expression calm but serious. "He's stable," he said. "It was a mild heart attack, but he's strong. He's asking for you." Relief flooded Sarah's chest as she hurried to his room. Henry was lying in bed, looking weak but smiling when he saw her. "Didn't expect you to wait around," he teased lightly. Sarah let out a breathless laugh. "Of course I waited. You scared me," he chuckled, though it was clear even laughing took effort. "Guess I've caused enough trouble for one day." Sarah shook her head. "Not trouble, but Henry, I can't take this." She placed the check on the bedside table. "This is your money. I can't accept it." His eyes softened, but his voice was firm. "Sarah, listen to me. I don't have much time left. Maybe a few years, maybe less. But I have spent too long holding on to things that don't matter. Money sitting in a bank means nothing. What matters is what we do with the time we have." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. "I see something in you," he continued. "You have a good heart, a rare kind of kindness. I want this to help you, to give you opportunities you might not have had otherwise. But more than that, I want you to use it to do something meaningful." Sarah swallowed hard, looking down at the check. It wasn't just money. It was a responsibility. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll make it count." Henry smiled. That's all I needed to hear. Over the next few weeks, Sarah visited Henry often. They became close, in a way she never expected, their friendship growing stronger with every conversation. She told him about her dreams, about how she had always wanted to start a community center for underprivileged kids, but never had the resources. And one day, She did exactly that, using the money Henry gave her. Sarah opened a small center in the heart of the city, a place where kids could come to learn, play, and feel safe. She named it the Emily Center, after the daughter Henry had lost, but never stopped loving. When she told Henry the name, tears welled in his eyes. "She would have loved this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Years passed, and Henry became a part of the center's story, visiting often, sharing his wisdom with the children who came through its doors. And when the day finally came that he wasn't there anymore, Sarah didn't feel grief the way she expected. She felt gratitude, because Henry had given her more than just money. He had given her purpose. And in the end, that one small act of kindness, the simple decision to stop and help, had changed both of their lives forever. And maybe, just maybe, it would keep changing lives for years to come.